top Trump administration official says that the United States is threatening to attack Russian missile development sites. The U.S. ambassador to NATO says that Russia is producing new medium-range ballistic missiles in violation of a 30-year-old arms reduction treaty.
Kay Bailey Hutchinson told NATO defense ministers in Brussels she thinks the U.S. and Russia can find a diplomatic solution, but that the United States would use force if necessary.
To discuss this, let's bring in foreign policy expert Michael Zanto. And Michael, what was Kay Bailey Hutchinson saying when she thought that the United States is willing to use force if necessary?
I think she misspoke a little bit, but I cannot overstate the gravity of the situation. The most important treaty that Gorbachev and Reagan signed is the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF. And it's a little counterintuitive. Russian and U.S. ICBMs can travel anywhere in the world, 10,000 miles, in 30 minutes. The problem with these intermediate missiles is they hit their targets in about 8 minutes instead of 30 minutes. And what the Europeans realized in the 70s is they would be completely destroyed in 8 minutes and the war would be over and the U.S. would join. So we sent our own intermediate missiles. And the Russians said, and this is one of the few times they were telling the truth, that was like a gun to their head. And if they freaked out, because they only had 3 minutes to react, they would fire missiles then in New York, Chicago, and D.C., et cetera, Los Angeles. So Gorbachev and Reagan, and Gorbachev was the only good Russian leader, realized the danger, the unique danger of these intermediate missiles, and they banned them. And it's counterintuitive. The ones that go 10,000 miles, at least you have about 30 minutes to react.
How do we know that the United States is keeping its side of the deal?
We are, because that's our nature. We don't violate these deals. In terms of strategic missiles, instead of, as opposed to battlefield tactical nukes, there are compliance measures. And we have the ability to tell the Russians are cheating. And the United States is not a government that cheats on these things. We're not. We don't have a need to. We have the most powerful conventional forces in the world.
Michael, the Russians, first of all, how do we know for sure that they are building these medium-range ballistic missiles? And what are the Russians intending to do with them?
They're threatening Europe. And this developed in the Obama administration. And reluctantly, the Obama administration had to reluctantly address it. And the Pentagon started to come out with counterproposals, ways to try to counter this by deploying our own intermediate nuclear missiles. For example, George H.W. Bush, as a gesture of friendship to the Russians, unilaterally eliminated our nuclear Tomahawks, which by the Tomahawk cruise missiles sea-launched, which by the way don't violate the INF treaty, but the Russians never actually eliminated their naval nuclear-tipped cruise missiles, though that is an actual allowable exception. So yeah, they're threatening Europe. That is the purpose behind it. This is the only conceivable purpose, is they're playing around and now violating the treaty so that they can basically extort the Europeans.
Why do you think that Russia is developing these weapons now, at a time when a president who says is the toughest on Russia yet sits in the Oval Office?
Well, this did not begin with Trump becoming president, but I would say it's very clear from all the statements that President Trump made on the campaign, he did not understand the threat of Russia. He saw Putin as his friend, which George W. Bush and Obama also made that mistake. But after what happened in Ukraine, followed by the violation of this very critical treaty, which is counterintuitive. One of the problems is Americans get confused by it. They don't understand the significance. And then by Russia's very aggressive belligerent activities in Syria. And by the way, the Euro missile crisis, which is what Gorbachev and Reagan ended, in many ways was much more dangerous than the Cuban Missile Crisis, although intuitively Americans understood that much more easily.
And Michael, the Russians, obviously, they've expressed some concern about NATO exercises literally on their doorstep. Is that part of all of this?
It's a lie. It's a complete lie. It's very clear that the Russians outgun us in that region. At the end of the Obama administration, they shipped U.S. Marine tanks to Norway because we realized that we had inadequate hardware to defend it. The RAND Corporation has said for the last few years, if the Russians attack our Baltic allies, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they will blow our forces to bits in 72 hours. The enclave of Kaliningrad, where these illegal nuclear missiles have been deployed, they have the capability of stopping our reinforcements with anti-ship and anti-aircraft missiles. So it's very dicey. But the tendency is 99% of the time, the Russians accuse us of something we're not really doing, that they're actually really doing. So, like, for example, anti-missile bases that they claimed we were going to deploy nuclear cruise missiles, they're the ones who are deploying nuclear missiles into Kaliningrad, and yet they try to claim the first their planned base in Poland, which was a defense base, and in Romania, we'd substitute and sneak in nuclear cruise missiles. So they're not threatened by our forces because the Russians know we don't have adequate forces there. In fact, 2013, the United States and Great Britain removed all of our tanks from Germany for the first time since the 50s. They knew this, and we only started to ship hardware back because of their aggression in Ukraine and because of their overwhelmingly threatening activities in that region.
Michael Zanto, foreign policy expert. Michael, thanks so much for coming on. I've heard from a lot of people over the last several months that there are great concerns about the Baltics. It does seem like Kay Bailey Hutchinson, the former Republican senator from Texas, who's the U.S. ambassador to NATO, perhaps misstated it a little bit, was a bit perhaps too blunt, intemperate in her remarks, but you do get the sense from a lot of people in NATO that this is a serious concern.
Yeah, and you know, some people, myself included, I would admit, question why does the U.S. need to have so many military bases at a very high cost across Europe, and I would say that might be the answer.
Yeah, and also, of course, concerns that the Russians might try to move into, you know, places like Latvia and other countries in the Baltics, and then what? So.
All right, First Lady Melania Trump is on a 5-day tour of Africa, her first major solo trip abroad. First stop, Ghana, where she handed out teddy bears to children at a local hospital.
Mrs. Trump will also travel to Malawi, Kenya, and to Egypt. The White House says that her trip will focus on maternal and newborn hospital care and on education for children.
And Mrs. Trump is the first immigrant First Lady. She came to the United States from Slovenia in 1996 and eventually got a green card and U.S. citizenship. And
now her immigration lawyer has written a book in which he sharply criticizes President Trump's policies in immigration. Michael Wild sat down with I24NEWS correspondent Jordana Miller in Jerusalem.
Michael Wiles, thank you so much for joining us here on I24 News. Your book has just come out, Safe Haven, Battles to Open the Golden Door. Why did you feel it was so important to write this book now?
We're allowing the administration to scare the hell out of Americans into believing that immigrants are our worst enemy when they're not. We need to embrace entrepreneurship, and we also need to make sure that we get this right. What's the point of building a wall in our southern border with 11 million people unlawfully present in America? And look at the numbers. We have 370-something immigration judges with more than 11 million people present. We don't have enough FedEx trucks, handcuffs, and beds to detain and deport these individuals. This is not within the Judeo-Christian ethic of our founding mothers and fathers that would give safe haven to those people that need something and then invest in that young stewardship so that they'll fight for America in the future.
On the one hand, you represent the First Lady, Melania Trump, and her immigration cases. And then on the other hand, you are such a vocal opponent of the president's immigration policies.
She's really the First Lady of the First Order. The first time I met her, I told her I was a very proud Democrat. Politics didn't play a role. She wanted the best in the country. And I told her I wasn't going to be voting for her husband. I was going to be voting for Secretary Clinton at the time. She wanted me to explain her immigration, and then I had the privilege of earning her trust with her parents and her sister as well. We have a very strong friendship and a respect for one another.
Chain migration is something that those who oppose immigration talk about all the time, and yet that is precisely what allowed Melania Trump's parents to come to the United States. But why is this debate over chain migration, in some sense, doesn't reflect really what's happening in immigration policy?
This is political theater to the administration, sadly. The lashon, the language, has changed significantly. Anchor babies. I never heard of a woman who came to my office so that she can have a child in America so 21 years later the child can sponsor her. Chain migration. It's really a beautiful landmark of immigration, which is family reunification. that parents and children will want to be with one another. They'll work harder, they'll employ non-citizens and citizens, and they pay it forward to the next generation. Unfortunately, this president and administration is trying to scare the hell out of everybody into believing that anybody with an accent is a threat, rather than enveloping and addressing those beautiful doors, those hinged doors that America has always had.
Many people wonder if Melania Trump has had a kind of softening influence on the president's what began as very hardline policies on immigration. Has she?
Mrs. Trump, much like the biblical Queen Esther, is an immigrant and has the ear of the president. I've seen this personally in the handling of the separating of children at the border and so forth, where there may be panic, where most think that the First Lady is calling to fire her lawyer who spoke up against the president. She, to her credit, calls me to thank me for being respectful to her husband and expressing my own opinion separate and apart from my representation.
Michael, thank you so much for joining us here on I24 News.
Thank you.
David, you know, we tend to put a lot of focus about illegal immigration to this country and not about legal immigration to the country. And the Trump administration, just like recent other administrations, is making hard life for legal immigrants to come to this country, hard workers. And if you want to fight illegal immigration, one part of it is to increase legal immigration.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. No dispute on that. Absolutely. Amazon workers, excuse me, they have something to celebrate. Vowing to pressure, the company will boost the company's minimum wage for all of its employees in the United States and the United Kingdom.
That includes both part-time and seasonal workers. Correspondent Elizabeth Haar has details.
Big news from tech giant Amazon.
The impact this is going to have on our employees and their families is significant. I'm incredibly excited about it.
Amazon Senior VP Dave Clark announcing the company plans to raise its minimum wage for all full-time, part-time, temp, and seasonal workers to $15 an hour.
This isn't about extending a ramp to $15 over multiple years. We decided to launch November 1st, just in time for the holiday for all our employees.
The announcement? Welcome news for these workers in California and Senator Bernie Sanders, who's been blasting the company founder and CEO for lowballing his workers.
Today, I want to give credit where credit is due. And I want to congratulate Mr. Bezos for doing exactly the right thing.
Amazon's next move, Washington, the company calling the current federal minimum wage $7.25 too low.
We certainly hope that we're able to influence Congress and to move forward with an increase in the federal minimum wage. We also are hopeful other large employers choose to follow us and increase their minimum wages as well.
And that was Elizabeth Haar reporting, and good for Amazon. And let's hope that it does have an impact on places like Walmart, because some of these large companies told they still have some of their own full-time workers who are on food stamps. That's how bad the wages are.
Well, that also explains why the Prime membership went up.
Yeah, well,
right?
Perhaps. I think supply and demand. By the way, you fly a lot internationally, right?
I do.
All right. Have you ever taken a close look at what happens to your bags when you check your luggage? Well, one passenger on board a flight to Hong Kong watched in horror as her bags were offloaded from his plane.
You can see the luggage handlers just throwing bags and boxes from the conveyor belt into a cart. The passenger posted the video to social media, and immediately it went viral. He wrote, "This is the way our beloved luggage is treated." Cathay Pacific has apologized, by the way, and is investigating. Does it surprise you, though?
No, I'm not surprised at all. And it's a lesson like people who are musicians, you never check your musical instrument under the plane because it'll come back in pieces. It's ridiculous.
Or
I mean, look, they just throw it around, or they put heavy bags on top of it.
Or you write fragile and then they don't throw it away. But, like, I don't expect them to handle it with gloves.
I'm with you. Don't be an optimist when it comes to air travel. That does it for Crossroads. More on I24 News after this.